Well, hello there and welcome back to my channel. Now today we're just having a brief overview at a little all-in-one flight control ESC board from a company we've featured before on this channel. That company is Jhemcu GHF411AIO, and they've been producing in recent weeks and months some sort of budget boards, sort of from 1S, 2S, all the way up to this guy here, which they say can run 6S. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but I've got a little experiment build idea for this that we'll get to later on. But certainly they're saying 6S, and maybe on the little toothpick twig style build on 6S it should be okay, because this is a 35 amp rated board. So certainly a lot of the bigger motors, even up to 22, 23 size motors, may only need something around about the 35 amp. So as we said, we've got an interesting idea for this in the future, but that's what they're saying this board is particularly rated for. This is a slightly new design. The previous highest one they had was 30 amp, so this is a new design with 35 amp. Now I've not had any problems. I've got a 20 amp board, I've got a 30 amp board, and both of those work really nicely. Not had any issues with them so far. So even though this is a budget brand, perhaps this might be a good option for you if you're thinking about doing a toothpick twig root style build, or maybe even something slightly bigger, but we'll get to that, as we said, in the future. So what do we get in the packaging? Well, we get obviously the board, we get a capacitor, so we can see here a company called Chong, never heard of them. Low ESR capacitor, which is a 35 volt 1000 microfarad, so certainly be useful. I would definitely use this on this particular board, or perhaps a nicer one if you've got from a brand like Rubicon that you know, but at the very minimum this would be fine. You get a couple lengths of wire for your XT60, which you get XT60 with it, so there's that. Some little gummies, and you get these little parts here which are the plugs for motors, so you could solder them up to these, as you can see there, these 3 points here. Though personally I don't know, drop that there, that's clever. I don't know of anyone really who does that. If you want a board that you want to plug into, then buy a board with the plugs already soldered on, because soldering these on, as you can see, I mean, they're really small wires. That's going to require some skill to solder that on, so you might as well just get one that's already been soldered up. But if you want to get this board and then put some plugs in, they're there, though I would recommend direct soldering. Certainly you're not going to get the motor wire being pulled out, and also you end up with issues sometimes with not getting a good connection with the plugs, and that can cause some issues with the motors and things like that. So I always recommend direct soldering if you can. And on here, as you can see, we've got small little pads that you might want to use, but then you've got these pads that are slightly larger, which actually, as you can see, are on the whole thickness of the board, so you can get a nice solder joint on there for your motor wire. Not really much written on the board itself, but we'll go through what all the pads are. We get obviously a plus and a minus, which is good on that, but I think that's pretty much it. Let's have a look at some weight. Turn on our scales, and it's coming in at 7.28 grams. I think officially it said 7.3, so that's not too bad. Let's put all the components on there as well, so we can get a good view of the full weight of this particular product. Put everything on there. So we're coming in at 17.91 grams for all the parts, so there you go. So let's have a look now at exactly what all the pads do on the flight controller ESC all-in-one board. Right, let's have a look then. So obviously we already have seen this. We've got our plus and a minus for our LiPo connection. So you can see you've got little holes there where you can poke the little wires for the capacitor through. That's really useful. A good way of holding it in place as you solder them all up together. Obviously you've got motor pads here. Motor 1, 2 and 3, motor 2, motor 3 and motor 4, and you obviously got the two options, the smaller pads or the larger pads, as we said, go all the way through on the edge of the board, so that's really useful. But none of the other pads have got any markings on, but I managed to find the markings online, so let's see what we've got here. So our first pad on the corner there is the ground, followed by 5 volt. Next to that is our buzzer minus, which we connect up, and then obviously the buzzer plus, the positive, goes to the 5 volt. If you connect the buzzer the other way around, obviously it won't work, so that's how you connect that one up. The next pad is for the LED strip, which obviously then you connect to 5 volt and ground as well. Then you've got this pad here, which is camera signal, and next to that is 5 volt and ground. So if you're connecting your camera, you connect them to these 3 pads here with the 5 volt in the middle, which is normally how they work it, in case you confuse the other two. You're not going to fry it out the board, you're only going to connect it to your signal and your grounds, not your signal to the 5 volt, which could cause problems. So that's really useful there. And then we move on to this side where we want to connect our receiver. So we've got ground, then we've got 4.5 volts, which receivers will take, not a problem at all. But what makes it good having 4.5 and not 5 volt for the receiver is that when you connect up the USB, it will power on. So you can do your binding process by just connecting the USB and not having to connect up a LiPo and try to do the juggle with trying to plug in a LiPo and trying to press the little button on the receiver and all that nonsense. So you've got that there, which is really useful. After that, you've got 3.3 volts, if that's what your receiver requires. Then S-Bus, which obviously to most people will be the most popular connection if you're using FR Sky. Followed by that you have RX2 and TX2. So RX2 and TX2, obviously if you're using Crossfire or if you're using FlySky or other protocols, you can connect them there. Ghost as well, I believe it goes on the T pad, so Ghost would go onto this pad here, which is TX2, and you set that in Betaflight. And finally, weirdly enough, this is here, this is for the VTX, that's VTX out is there on this end one, which is a bit strange, but we'll get to why perhaps is a bit strange in a second. Now these pads here, hopefully this is focused, let's see, are a bit unusual as well. So that one there I believe is RSSI, you've got that. Then you've got what it says, I'm not quite sure what that is, SSS? S5? I don't know. I've got no idea on that pad, but look on Banggood on the link below and you'll be able to see what that is. And then these pads here are SCL and SDA pads if you might need those. So these are probably the least likely to be used pads, which is why they're set back, because obviously we do a solder and the wire comes off this way. These are less likely to be used, so which is why they're in that position there, even if it's a bit unusual, but at least you have those pads depending on if you want to use any of these options. We come down to these pads here, which for some people will be very interesting indeed. Get the camera to focus on it. Here we are. Right, so this bottom pad here is ground. Now this pad here is not 5 volts, it's in fact 9 volts, which for some people will be really useful, especially for their VTX. So the 9 volt connection there. But also, if you want to connect up a digital HD system, a DJI system, you might want to connect on these, because these two connections here, very useful, because these are, that's TX1 and RX1. So with these 4 pads here, you can connect up your digital HD system, which is obviously what they had in mind when they put these pads together. But if you want to connect up a normal VTX, well then you have these 2 pads here, and then this pad here, so you have to run a wire along, unfortunately, but that's the way they've worked it out. But that's really, really useful, especially if you want to connect up digital HD to this system here. So there are pads, really nice laid out. Quite, as we can see, this is a 1.5mm driver, so you can get an idea about the size of the pads from the tip of this. So let's do a 1.5mm driver size screw. So what's that? An M2. So you can see how big the pads are in comparison to this tool that I'm using here. So there we are. Hopefully that's useful to you. There's a link below and that will take you through to what all the pads do for when you want to look at it soldering up yourself, if you decide to go for this particular all-in-one flight controller ESC board. So hope you found this informative. Really appreciate you spending your time watching my content, I really do. So thanks so much for watching, and perhaps I'll catch you in a video in the future. Take care, bye bye.